welcome back to the channel. I've missed you as always. I've missed you. If you're new here, I'm David Colarossi, and this is a channel where typically I use events in pop culture to talk about concepts in psychology. Today's video is going to be have a different tone than is maybe typical for my videos. I want to talk about grief, and in particular, I want to talk about grief as it relates to the passing of Garrison Brown and kind of the experience of the Sister Wives fandom. If you're watching this video, you probably know that Garrison completed suicide, I think, early last week. And since then, there has been a massive outpouring of support for the family. And there's been a massive outpouring of people who have been fans of the Sister Wives show for the last 15 years, people that are grieving intensely. And I think that some people have been shocked by the level of intensity of their grief. And I sort of wanted to talk about that intensity and talk about the grief process in general. So here we go. So the reason why the grief is so intense is because people have actual relationships with Garrison Brown and the whole Sister Wives family. You know, it's a parasocial relationship. While he maybe doesn't know who you are and the family doesn't know who we are, on our end as the audience, the relationship is very real. You're very connected to that child that you watched grow up, and when he passes away or there's a traumatic event in the family, you feel it. This is why, by the way, there is all of the energy around just the divorces in the family. You are so connected to all of these people that you really feel it. And here's why I think it's important, is because the relationship was not a two-way relationship. I worry that the audience sometimes feels guilt or shame or embarrassment for having this intense grief. And I thought it's been interesting to see how different people online respond to it, right? There's the sort of the standard response of people saying, "Oh, I'm so sad." But you also have people that are focused less on being sad and more on explaining why it happened. It's this person's fault, these people did it, and I hope as a consequence they change their behavior, right? They want to understand it conclusively, this is why it happened. Well, other people, instead of talking about why it happened, they want to talk about kind of what the grief process should look like. What's an appropriate way to grieve? How you should comment on it. Can you comment on it? Can you make videos on it? Should you reach out to the family? If you do talk about it, what words you can say, what words you can't say, right? We want to add all of these sort of guidelines. Both the guidelines and the placing blame and responsibility, those are both done, they come from a good place. What you're trying to do is control the uncontrollable. You had this thing happen that has shaken kind of our foundation of how life should roll out, and it's chaotic. It feels disorganized and chaotic, and so our response to it is to go, well, let's understand it. Let's put some structure around this so that we can really move forward logically. The truth is, we can't. There is no sort of perfect way to move through this. There's no way to totally explain this. We have to deal with the kind of ambiguity and the surprise and the pain that comes with this. So I think it would be valuable for me to talk about kind of what grief often looks like, not because I want to be prescriptive about how you should grieve, but because I want to give you an idea of the sort of breadth of emotions and behaviors that you might experience through this process. I want to normalize it for you. So the most well-known research on grief comes from Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote a book in 1969 called On Death and Dying. She was studying terminally ill patients and their healthcare providers and their family members to look at what are the stages people go through when they've lost a loved one or they know that they're going to die themselves. And what she found was 5 stages. First, there's denial, then there's anger, then there's bargaining, then there's depression, and then eventually there's acceptance. Now, when these stages were first talked about, the implication was that everybody went through all of these stages at the same degree in order. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross went back on that and said, look, these stages don't have to be resolute. There can be other emotions there. You might feel some with different levels of intensity. It's not always going to be linear. You may cycle back. You may skip one, right? The idea here really, I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that there is a massive spectrum of emotions and stages of grief, and they're different for everybody. So my biggest sort of suggestion for you would be, and I even sort of hesitate from saying like, this is how I want you to grieve. I just want you to think about grief in this way. There's been a lot of people researching what grief looks like, and the prevailing view 50 years after Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book is that you're going to experience a lot of emotions with varying levels of intensity, and you will cycle back. It's not going to be done. So you should give yourself the space and the bandwidth without judgment to experience those emotions. If I had one suggestion for you, it would be don't judge your own experience and don't judge the experience of anybody else. Grief is going to happen whether we sort of like it or not. We're not going to control what it looks like. So what you should do is honor the process. Now, I do think that there are things you can do to make it more manageable. And what I mean by that is add some structure to it. So in general, when you think about grief coping strategies, they kind of fall into two buckets. One bucket is move towards the grief, and the other bucket is move away from the grief. Towards the grief looks like thinking about the person, talking about the person, writing about the person, listening to music that reminds you of the person that you're grieving, right? You are allowing yourself to dive in and feel all of those emotions. You are allowing yourself to actively cry and grieve openly over this person. You're moving towards it. The other way is to avoid it. Go to parties, go to movies, go hang out with friends, go have sex, right? You're distracting yourself. You're pulling yourself away from those emotions. And I think a lot of times when we're grieving, we sort of go like, I'm going to hide from this and go totally move away and never allow myself to experience it. Or we go, I'm going to just sit in this pain forever. So my suggestion would be allow yourself or even push yourself to do both. So there's interesting research that shows that when people schedule a therapy session, they immediately feel better even before going to see the therapist. And the reason is that psychologically they know, oh, I have this time on the calendar where I'm going to grieve or I'm going to work through whatever it is that's distressing me, right? The idea that you know you have the space for it sort of takes the pressure off. And I think the same thing is true with grief. Give yourself the time, even schedule the time to grieve. This evening, 3 times a week, 5 times a week, twice a day, whatever the cadence needs to be, I'm going to allow myself to think about the emotions I have as they relate to Garrison. That may mean that you're watching Sister Wives episodes. It may mean that you're writing in a journal, you're talking to friends, whatever it is that allows you to process the emotion. But you also have to push yourself to have time on the calendar where you get out of the house and you go hang out with friends. Put time on the calendar where you watch TV or movies or whatever that distracts you from the pain and allow yourself to go back and forth. And my final suggestion is if the pain, if the distress, if the grief feels overwhelming to you, if you feel like you are stuck in it in a way that scares you, if the distress is hard to tolerate, please seek support. Go see a therapist, go see a counselor, go talk to a professional that can help walk you through this. Grief is something that responds very well to treatment. Give yourself the opportunity to work through it with a professional. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below.